let's talk about jungle items. Now, these are going to be the 4 items that build out of your hunter's machete, and it's going to be Poacher's knife, Ranger's trailblazer, Stalker's blade, and Skirmisher's saber. Now, each one of them is viable in their own regard, except the Poacher's knife. So let's get into it and see what these items have to offer. Poacher's knife. Let's begin with the one that isn't really good. Now, it gives you a new smite called Scavenging Smite. And just to preface everything, all these items cost the exact same. So $850 total price, $450 recipe, machete costing $400 as we know. And the unique passive is the same for all 4 items. So it's not something that we have to talk about. It's only about the unique passive that is individual to each jungle item. Scavenging Smite. When you smite and kill a large monster in the enemy jungle, the cooldown of smite is halved. You gain 20 bonus gold, and you gain 175 increased movement speed, decaying over 2 seconds. Now this is an item that you, on paper, think, okay, I'm going to be counter jungling quite a bit, and I'm going to set my sights on counter jungling. But let's be realistic here. One of the best times to counter jungling is before your first buy, where you can take somebody's other red buff, somebody's other blue buff. You can go for a blue steal, perhaps a wraith steal, before even buying. And that's usually one of the good windows to counter jungle. So before your first buy, you won't have access to poachers. And by buying a poacher's knife, you're really making it known to everybody that your plan is going to be to live in the enemy's jungle. And that's one thing that I don't particularly like about it, but it is useful in one instance with one champion, and that one's going to be Nunu jungle. This is the only champion that this could be remotely viable on, because Nunu doesn't really want to fight, and to be honest, the added skirmish potential from Stalker's blade or Skirmisher's saber doesn't really do all that much for him. Personally, I prefer Stalker's on him, but Poacher's knife is a good item for Nunu to take and just counter jungle heavily, because it's difficult to prevent him from counter jungling because of the way the champion works. He has an easy time getting in and getting out, and the movement speed does help him quite a bit. Now, as for the bonus gold, I wouldn't look at that for too much, because you have to remember your smite is still on the same long cooldown, which maybe if the cooldown was a little bit lower when you purchase Poachers, it would be a better item. But now that the cooldown is the same in all the items, it's not that good to run this item. So you can throw this one out the window and only run it if you're playing Nunu. If you don't want to run it while playing Nunu, like, it's fine. You're really not missing out on much. Perhaps in a scenario where you're playing some sort of other role with Smite. I mean, I saw Heimerdinger with Smite the other day that was doing really well. Same with Blitz support with Smite, but that's a discussion for another time. Let's go to the next one. Ranger's trailblazer. The most common one that we see nowadays, and it gives you a unique passive called Blasting Smite. Smite deals half damage to all monsters and enemy minions near the target and stuns them for 1.5 seconds. Casting Smite on a monster restores 15% of missing health and mana. Now, this item is used on champions that have a difficult time clearing the jungle or lack sustain. So if you want a power farm, this is the item to go. So if you're a level 6 jungler, Ranger's Trailblazer will help you get to level 6 a little bit sooner. Things like Vi, Nocturne, Sejuani, you know, you can do other smites for sure, but this will help. Jarvan, just champions that you want to power farm with that could lack a little bit of sustain. On your first buy, you can actually start ganking quite a bit without even purchasing wards, because you can rely on the Ranger's Trailblazer. So this item is never a bad idea. You can get this item on any jungler and it will always be good. Like, there is no downside to getting this one, which is why it's the most common one. You just can't go wrong, really. But the other ones can be a little bit better in situations. As for Rangers though, back to it, the missing health and mana, be sure to use your smite when you're lower. Don't use it in the beginning of clearing the monsters, because you will heal for less. This one also allows you to make quite a bit of plays around jungle fights, because if you can find a nice monster, you smite it, heal up for a little bit. Another good thing about this item is that it is the best one for defending sieges, because you can smite the whole wave and stun all creeps around it. It works on the creeps as well, so it's good for protecting your towers. It's a really nice one. The heal is great, and that's why it's the best one at the moment. I mean, it's just an all-purpose smite. Don't go wrong with it, but if you want to have an extra oomph in your ganks and a little more power into your ganks, and you don't really care about the clearing, you're going to look for the next two smites that we're going to talk about. Stalker's Blade. This is a really nice one because it gives you Chilling Smite. Now, Smite can be cast on enemy champions, dealing 28 to 160 true damage, 64, and stealing 20% of a target's movement speed for 20 seconds. Now, obviously, the 28 to 164 is based on the champion level, so the higher the level, the higher the damage. This is an item that you want to get on champions that may not necessarily need help in clearing the jungle. So champions like Lee Sin don't really need that much help clearing it because of the high damage, single target high damage of your Q, coupled with the AoE Tempest, make Lee Sin a nice wave clear, a nice jungle clearer. So Stalkers is a good choice on him because Rangers, even though it works on him, it's a great item on any champion. Stalkers can make your gank a little bit stronger and your 1v1 potential really strong as well. A downside to the Stalker's Blade, though, is that if you're focused on objectives, you may not be able to use your smite during the objectives, during any fight around the objective, leaving you either without the ability to use smite in fight because you have to save it for the objective, or the ability to not use a smite on the objective because you used it in the fight. So if you get this one, I'd recommend you try to master saving your smite so that you can have 2 charges up before any objective or any fight, so that you can use one in the fight and another one during the buff steal, baron, dragon, whatever the case. A thing about this smite though is that it's most efficient not necessarily when you're playing around the champion that you're playing, but about the champions that you're playing against. So a lot of champions can be caught out of position just with a tiny little bit of a slow. So let's say you're Jarvan and you get near somebody, you press a Chilling Smite on them, you hit them with one of these, and they have to be very thoughtful of your next move, because now you're in range to combo them and you're in range to hit them with a Cataclysm. So it's another way to force summoners so that you can go and either follow it up or just try again. So it's a really good item against immobile champions, or champions that you can force meaningful abilities out of them. Things like an Ahri. Ahri, you can hit him with a Chilling Smite while her Q is down, so the movement speed isn't there. You can easily force a flash out of her, and that's very valuable because if you do this before any fight, you have a huge edge because you traded a smite for an ultimate or perhaps a flash. So great item versus immobile champions. This one is good, in my opinion, also on champions that have great clear, great sustain, and no mana. Now that means Rek'Sai does very well with this one because with the movement speed steal, you go a little bit faster, can just hit him with a smite, you tunnel behind them, get the smite off, now you get a nice little knockup or burn a flash. Rek'Sai does really well with this one because she has AoE clearing abilities, has great sustain, and good single target damage. Same goes with a champion like Zac. Zac does really well with this one. Hit somebody with a smite once you jump in, position yourself for a better jump. Around the team fight, you're moving a little bit faster during your R because of the Chilling Smite. Does a little bit more damage. Zac's high base damage can mean that you kill somebody one-on-one. So it gives you a better one-on-one skirmish than the Ranger's Trailblazer because it's a little bit more damage. And if you're against somebody that uses a lot of movement abilities, the reposition or ability to dodge skill shots can be very nice. I mean, same goes with, I just want to give another example of somebody that you can force abilities. An AD carry. You can force one of their dashes and force an ensuing team fight, and they find themselves without that cooldown for the beginning of the fight. They're going to have to play a lot more cautious. So it's a great item all around, but don't get it on champions that struggle with sustain. So champions like Jarvan can have a little bit of trouble with this one. If you can't find a lot of ganks early, you're gonna not be able to clear that well early on, because the AoE is not there, because the sustain isn't there. So be wary of this one. This is a great snowballing item, but if you fall behind, it will not be as useful as a Ranger's Trailblazer, because as the name of the Ranger's Trailblazer, whoever has it and isn't falling behind, they're going to blaze past you in terms of farm and levels and items, just because of how effective it is to AoE farm with that item. Next, we have a new flavor of the month, the Skirmisher Saber. Now, I want to point out right here that all 4 items are different swords. This one actually happens to be a shitty sword made out of perhaps stone and a feather, while this one is improving to, the Iron Age. It's an axe. Then we have a nice sword, and the Skirmisher Saber being a saber. So you can really tell how effective the Poacher's knife is versus the saber, one being an actual weapon of a modern weapon, if you'd like to go that far, while the other one being a caveman's tool. Now, anyways, Skirmisher Saber. This one is making a lot of waves lately, and it gives you challenging smite. Smite can be cast on enemy champions, marking them for 6 seconds. While marked, you deal 60 to 162 based on level, true damage over 3 seconds, have vision of them, and reduce their damage to you by 20%. Now, this is a really strong smite right now, particularly with tank junglers. When you purchase this item and the opposing jungler does not have this item, it's almost guaranteed that the jungler with this item will win any 1v1 against the other jungler. So right off the get-go, you have a huge advantage. It's really strong, but remember, the clear on this doesn't offer anything for clearing, unlike the Ranger's Trailblazer. But similar to Stalker's Blade, they're using combat, but this one is more effective on one-on-one combat than the Stalker's Blade. Because if you stick to somebody and it's an actual fight, everybody's hitting each other, this one will be much, much better. Just like Stalker's Blade, you don't want to buy this on champions that struggle clearing. And if you do, then you need to be prepared to be a little bit behind in farm, but still be able to duel people because of the ability to win 1v1s with this. Now, the important thing about this item is that late game it's the best one, by far. There's not another one that comes close. 20% damage reduction means that any AD carry in the late game, or carry by that notion, is gonna not deal any damage to you. And before the 5.5 patch, Skirmisher Saber was being experimented on with warrior junglers, and I think that's a bad idea, because with warrior junglers, you're not that squishy, you don't really get to the 20% damage reduction doesn't really help all that much, because you're that squishy anyways. You're not building tank, you're building damage. So 20% reduction out of not having many resistances, not that much HP, isn't that effective. So you die anyways, and you probably wouldn't be able to get enough abilities off to 1v1 somebody and have them, stay in position for you to really make use of the smite. But with the addition of tank junglers, this item has become really strong, because what this does is it boosts the damage of any champion that you're playing quite a bit towards a specific target, as well as the tankiness. The best aspect of this item is the damage reduction by 20%. It means that you're not touching that guy if he's a tank. If you're dealing with a late game, 4000 HP, Dr. Mundo coming at you with Skirmisher, Saber, a Thornmail, Gromp passive, and you get smited by this. It doesn't matter what champion you are, you probably cannot 1v1 him because of how much damage he can soak and how much he returns to you. So it's an amazing item late game, and on tanks it's really, really good because it reduces the damage and makes it that much harder to kill you, boosting your tanking abilities rather than just trying to make you survive a little bit longer in the fight as if you were a warrior. This item I would recommend on tanks and not on warrior champions, because I think the Stalker's Blade, if you want to go for the route of trying to 1v1 people, the extra little burst from Stalkers can be nice and could make a difference, particularly on champions like Lee Sin, where you can squeeze in one chilling smite, do a little bit more damage on your resonating strike, get a better execute off. But on Skirmisher Saber, you know, on champions like Vi and whatnot, it does help out a little bit, but it's not as effective as it could be on, say, like a Mundo or a Nudir. Now, personally, I prefer the Stalker's Blade on Nudir or Stalker's Blade on other champions, but if you're playing a tank, I would highly recommend you experiment with this one and find a way to make this item work because of how powerful it is coupled with tanks and the Gromp passive. You gotta remember, it's a combination of things that make this item strong. By itself, it's not that good. But when you combo it with the return damage of Gromp, with the damage mitigation from this, with a lot of HP and a Thornmail, Thornmail's a really good item right now, by the way, for a jungler, this item rocks. It's really strong, and you can run it on warrior champions, and it gives you the ability to 1v1 anyone. That's honestly the biggest thing about it, that when you're jungling and you see the other guy has it and you don't want to go near them. You don't want to try to 1v1 them unless you know the smite's down, or if they're really low HP and you just can flat out win. Get this on champions that can stick to targets, as I mentioned, the tanks. The warriors kind of work with it, but as another side note, late game, always switch to this. If you have a full build and you can afford switching to Skirmisher Saber, switch to it. Absolutely. And here's a little thing that I actually tried doing a couple of games ago. I accidentally played support blitz, and I didn't realize I kept my smite on. So I felt, okay, I have smite on. How can I make the best out of this scenario? Smiting Gromp gives you return damage on the Gromp passive, meaning that when I went to bottom lane, when anybody tried to trade with me, I'd give them the return damage, and I'd be able to they could not lane against me because I just returned so much damage without even touching them. They would just be hitting me and killing themselves. Then eventually upgraded to a Skirmisher Saber, and with more smites on Gromp constantly go and kill Gromp, and improve this to a Cinder Hulk as well on the jungle blitz, get a little bit on the support blitz with smite, get a little bit tanky. Nobody could 1v1 me. I actually ended up 1v1ing a Mundo later that game, and I did try to an Olaf. I 1v1 the Olaf. I tried 1v1ing a Mundo, but it wasn't really that close. It was pretty close, but he won out in the end because Mundo, his regen, I couldn't burn through it because I didn't have the ignite. I had the smite, but I wouldn't have even imagined thinking about 1v1ing any one of those champions without this upgrade, without the ability to get the Gromp passive. So this item really, really strong right now. Highly recommend it. Experiment with it, particularly on tanks. Jungle Scion as well, pretty good. Same with the Dr. Mundo. I'd like to try it on Zac and other champions that have an easy time just sticking to somebody and just giving it their all. So I hope this video helped you decide what items to buy and kind of explaining a little bit as to when these items are good and when they're not. And I'd like to give examples of which champions to run them. So let's just go down a little bit of a breakdown as to what champions. So back to the Poachers, Nunu, that's it. Rangers, Trailblazer, like literally every champion, like Nidalee, Jarvan, Lee, Rexa, and Rexa not so much, Zac, Sejuani, Mundo. There's so many jungle champions right now. You can get this one on anyone you like. Stalkers, champions that can fight a lot. Lee Sin, Rek'Sai, Zac, Udyr, Kha'Zix. These are really, really good that don't really need help with the sustain. Skirmisher, Saber, Mundo, and perhaps warriors like Lee Sin and Vi and Udyr. Other tanks, Sion, Sejuani. These items make you super tanky. So consider these items and try them out and let me know what you think about it. And I'll see if I can put another video in the near future, because I just felt like this would be a nice simple one for a change. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.